This playlist collects together the individual modules that comprise that second lecture on informal fallacies. In this lecture, we're going to talk about fallacies of weak induction specifically. So we'll talk a little bit about what makes a fallacy of weak induction, why they are effective. Then we'll look at some specific examples. We'll look at appeal to unqualified authority, appeal to ignorance. We'll talk a little bit about what analogical reasoning is and why it is a form of inductive inferences. I'll give you a general account of analogical reasoning and a specific version applied to Bohr's discovery of the Bohr-Rutherford model of the atom. Then we'll talk about fallacies of weak analogy generally. We'll move to hasty generalization after that, then false cause, and we'll finish this particular lecture playlist with a discussion of slippery slope. So we use inductive inferences all the time in our everyday activities. We really couldn't get around without making a bunch of inductive inferences. And as you recall, inductive inferences are just inferences that are ampliative in nature. They go beyond what's guaranteed to be true, given what we know right now. And so for this reason, they always involve a certain amount of epistemic risk. That is, we trade off a little bit of a guarantee of truth in order to get that inferential power. So there's always the possibility that we start off with good information, we make a good inference, and we still get a bad conclusion. Fallacies of weak induction are worse. They are arguments where our initial information doesn't actually make our conclusion nearly as likely to be true as we perceive it to be, as it looks like the argument establishes. So they're rhetorically successful again, but they're logically inadequate. And why is that? Well, part of the reason why is the way that our System 1 inference strategies evolved to make inferences. Recall, we're talking about small, homogeneous, stable environments where our experiences are likely to be representative, where a lot of the problems that we're solving are relatively concrete problems that are about the immediate future, right? And so as a result, we tend to think that the information we have available to us is in fact good information. They're representative samples from which we can make inferences about the future, about what we can't see, and so on. And for this reason, right, we have this tendency to underutilize facts about the reliability or predictive value of evidence when we make inductive inferences like this. We tend to make inferences based on indifference to the size of a sample, whether or not the sample is biased or has other difficulties that would render it unrepresentative, not a good sample for making our inductive inference. And as a result, it's pretty easy to craft a fallacy of weak induction, to present an argument that seems stronger than it is, because when it comes to inductive inferences, we're pretty innately gullible. So the first fallacy that we want to look at here is a nice bridge fallacy between fallacies of relevance and fallacies of weak analogy, because it involves components of both. It's called appeal to unqualified authority. So during the Neolithic period, after the agricultural and herding revolutions, where people were making more calories than it took to produce those calories, by growing food, by raising food, and so on, they started to gather together in larger groups. They started to specialize. And one of the ways they specialized was in terms of social authorities and organizing things. Another way they specialized was epistemic authorities. Certain people knew how to do this stuff or knew about this stuff, and they became the authorities in those areas, the people that you would go to. So if you have a leak in your plumbing, you're Authority is your plumber. If you want to know about particle mechanics, your authority is a physicist. If you want to know about philosophy, your authority is a philosophy professor. And so we rely on epistemic authorities. And essentially what we do is we make this assumption that the pronouncements of authorities are in fact more likely to be true than our own beliefs or the beliefs of other people generally, that they raise the likelihood of what they say because of their epistemic position. They're better trained, better informed, they're in a better position. And so as a result, we use their knowledge, their information, their statements as evidence for things that fall within their domain. However, right, we're not, again, particularly sensitive to whether or not someone's an authority about the particular thing that they're making pronouncements on. We tend to allow authority to shift from one context to another. So political authorities are cited for knowledge about things that fall outside of their political authority. Famous people are cited for knowledge that goes way beyond their authority as famous figures. We cite physicists about biblical issues, and so on and so on and so on. So we're very disposed to just take authority at face value and not evaluate the authority in terms of whether or not their insights are in fact more likely to be true than our own or the average person. Now, this is a pretty old fallacy. It's got a Latin name, argumentum ad verecundiam. It was probably actually used a lot in ancient times, particularly during the scholastic period, but it's certainly very prevalent now. So how does appeal to unqualified authority work? Well, you cite some authority, right? This was, in fact, what a graduate student at University of Minnesota once told me about why they were an atheist. Howard Stern, famous shock jock Howard Stern, had talked about how there are no good reasons to believe in God. And that was the reason this person cited. Right? Here's the difficulty. Howard Stern, I don't know, infamous radio personality maybe. But if you look at Howard Stern's credentials for making pronouncements about religious ontology, right, the existence and nature of a deity, he's a C- communication student at BU. Right? He's really not someone, if there is anyone who's an authority about the existence and nature of a religious figure or religious deity. So he's perfectly entitled to his opinions, perfectly entitled to express his opinions, but his opinions don't count as the pronouncements of an authority, where that authority is more likely to be saying things that are true or well evinced than someone else. And so as a result, you commit the fallacy of appeal to unqualified authority. And we commit this fallacy all the time. We cite authorities from physics when we're talking about ethics. We cite political figures when we're talking about medical issues, and so on and so on. And whenever we cite an authority whose authority isn't knowledge in this particular area, then we commit the fallacy of appeal to unqualified authority.